Hi, this is Bob from INSYDIUM, and this is part 4 of our snow peel tutorial series. And in this video, we're going to finalize our particle animation and get those particles cached, and then we'll set up our advanced rendering techniques so we can render the various elements of this lollipop scene. So, let's get started. So here we are in our lollipop scene, and you can see that we have got half of the rendering set up here. We've got our lollipop textures, and we've also got these nice residual particles, the large chunks and the smaller dots which are stuck to the surface. But we're not rendering yet our main kind of particle simulation, which is our effect. So that's what we're going to get cracking with now. So let's just switch off and get rid of that real-time preview for now. So what we need to do is have a look in our system snow particles. These are the ones that we're going to sort out the rendering of now. We've got some simulation changes that we need to make to this as well. So whilst we do that, let's just concentrate first on our big chunks. So that'll be our emitter large volume. So let's switch off all of these other emitters, the lights, the small surface and small volume, and now we just have our large chunks. And if we hit play, you'll see that we've got these blowing off our surface of our lollipop, and they're kind of blowing away. Now, if we go into our scene camera here, and this is just a rough scene camera, this is going to be adjusted and animated later, but we can have a look at what this is going to feel like. And I'm seeing from this view that we already have far too many of these large chunk particles. And if we give them a same display mode as our static ones, let's go to the emitter large volume, let's go to the display tab, we'll change the editor display from box to box filled. And if you want to kind of force that display without having to resim the whole scene, I can just click on force display here. And now they're the same. And now we've done that, look, you can see we've just got way too many of these large volume particles. So let's go to the emission tab, and we'll just reduce the shot count. It's 1,000 too many. Let's try 300. And we'll resim. So now we've got fewer, and that's already looking better, and these are going to be kind of flying past the camera. Now there's another couple of things I've noticed that are wrong here. If you concentrate your eyes around this area. So what's happening is these particles are completely static, and they are within the volume. And remember that we've got a question in this emitter. If we go to our questions tab, you can see we have an inside volume question. And what it's doing is every frame it's asking the question, is that particle inside those animated spheres that we're using to cut out to make our bool object. Let's just make all that visible. These animated spheres are being deleted from the snow shell geometry to create our bool shell. So if we go forward, you'll see that as those animated spheres intersect that shell, it gives the illusion of this being cut away, and those spheres also trigger the wind modifier to blow our particles away. So it's a cool setup which is working perfectly for us. Let's just make all that invisible. But one of the problems is, because we have set tangential rotation in these large particles, so they're always orientated in the direction of travel. But when they are born, they are static, so they have no direction of travel. And as soon as they get within the volume, the wind modifier gets activated, and suddenly they jump to that tangential orientation. So watch here, you'll see them snap. See, look, the angles and the orientation snaps to that tangential, and that isn't looking very kind of fluid. So there's a setting we can exploit to sort that. Let's just minimize our scene geo. We'll go to our emitter large. Let's go to our extended data. That's where we set up the rotation. And in the general data tab, look, with the rotation, we have selected use rotation and tangential, but we've got this rate of change setting which is going to sort this snapping out for us. If we just reduce this down from the default 100%, now you're going to see we're going to get kind of like an ease in to that tangential orientation. They're not snapping, they're rotating into it. So that's looking much better already. All right, another couple of issues here I've noticed with our sim. First of all, these large chunks are flying too close to the camera. Let's just move up to our object manager, come out of our scene camera, and they're flying too closely to our camera in this direction. So we want to just angle the wind so it's blowing them in this kind of diagonal direction. So let's do that. We'll go down to our modifiers. We have two winds. We have a wind and a wind accelerator. So let's just make those visible so we can see the fans, and we'll select both of them. We'll hit R for the rotate tool, and what we're going to do is we're just going to rotate them a bit more on the heading to blow them over a little bit more in that direction, something like that, and maybe we could just blow them up just slightly. Alright, so that is going to help. Let's play it from here and see if we're getting them blowing away from the camera a bit more. Yep, so that's looking much better. One more issue that we've got is that if we come to here, let's just make those winds invisible again. And if we'll probably go into our scene camera for this, go into our scene camera, you'll see that our wind is blowing them away. But then at some point we've got some stragglers that start to kind of move back in this direction. Look, this one is moving back across here, and this one is moving back in the wrong direction completely. Let's have a look. And there's a reason why this is happening. So this one's moving this way, this one's moving this way, and that's not what we want. There's a reason this is happening, and it's to do with the way in which we have mapped the wind. Now remember, if we go to our modifiers, let's just go to the first wind. We have set up some various different maps in this wind. The first map, map 1 in our data mapping tab, we're mapping the wind strength to the colour brightness of the particle. And so what this is saying is darker particles have less wind strength up to the lighter particles which have more wind strength. So that's one of the maps that we've set up. Let's just give ourselves a little bit more room. Let's close that one down. The second map is based on how far the particles have travelled, and it is saying that when at 0 centimetres and beyond they will have full wind strength, but as they get towards travelling 20 centimetres they're losing that wind strength until it gets to 0. Okay, so there's that, and we also have another wind modifier which is set to, once they get to this point, it then starts to speed them up a bit more. And if we go to our wind accelerator to the mapping tab, you can see that they have the same distance travelled, but on this one it's saying once they get to 30 centimetres this one will start kicking in and get stronger and stronger and stronger until it gets to 110 centimetres. And what's happening with those stray ones, which are then moving in what looks like the wrong direction, is they're falling between the gaps of these two maps, of this one falling off, switching off, and this one switching on. So they're not getting enough wind strength, and then the turbulence is being able to push them in that wrong direction. So to sort that out, what we could do is, look, let's go to our first wind. Let's just increase this up to, say, 26 centimetres, and let's see if that has solved the problem, if that means that we don't have any that have gone into that no man's land of no wind and then are getting pushed around in the wrong direction by the turbulence. Yeah, so it's kind of helped. There's one that's just floating a little bit. Let's have a look. There's one just around the middle here. Look, this one. That's just not quite got enough. So we could now, we've slightly adjusted that first wind. Now let's get the accelerator, do a couple of things. Look, let's put this at 25 centimetres when that starts, and let's ramp it up to full blast a bit sooner. Up at 100 centimetres they'll have the full power of that wind. So now we have sorted that out, we still should have that nice random wind. We should have the initial burst that then slows down a bit but then starts to pick up and come out, and we've got rid of our weird stragglers. Okay, so we can again refine that more should we need to, but at least we understand what is happening with that, and we've got most of that sorted. So one more thing to note is that if we go to our scene camera, we haven't quite got the right angle for this. we need to adjust this scene camera a little bit as these are coming away. We're getting the effect that we want now. This is looking nice, but we're going to want to actually go to our camera. Let's just take off this protection tag here, which was meaning we couldn't move the camera. Let's delete that off and then go into our camera, and we just need to change this angle slightly. It needs to be something more like viewing it from this angle. Let's just play those particles through again. Okay, that's looking good. We've still got a slight problem with a straggler particle here, and I'm going to show you a trick of how we can get rid of this without having to adjust our wind. So this is the one that we don't like. It's moving a little bit unnaturally, and it's not moving away with the other particles. So we could just mess around with that wind and try and sort it out, or we could just get rid of it. And there's a really cool trick of doing that. So if we go to our emitters and select the emitter large volume, with this selected, we want to delete this particle. And we can do that with the particle painter. So let's go to the INSYDIUM menu, X particles. Let's go to our painter. And in the painter, we need to have it set to delete particles, which we have. And now you can see, look, I can just put my brush over it, click it, and it's deleted. Fantastic. And even if we resim, it'll always be deleted from its birth. So we have managed to sort that out. We've got our big particles blasting away, lifting off as it peels, and we've got rid of that problem one that was being an irritant. All right, so that is our large particles sorted. They're looking really good. So now we can move on to some of our smaller particles. And in fact, before we do, let's actually get some of these rendering in our viewport now that we've got that simulation looking good. So what we could do, let's go to a scene where a frame where we've got them in shot. So something like this. Okay, and what we need to do, if we go to our INSYDIUM Cycles real-time preview, and we could just dock that in our interface there. So obviously we're not seeing them because we've not got them set up, but we have already set up these particles in our system painted. So we could just steal all of the settings. So let's open up that system painted, and you can see that we have our emitter large volume particles, and the reason we can see them is because we have a Cycles 4D instance tag set up. And this instance tag is, if we have a look in its settings, we have dragged all of our 10 join objects in there. So it means that every particle will randomly be given one of these 10 join objects. And just as a reminder, those join objects are our snow chunks geo. If we open this up and move down, each one of these join objects has a deformed sphere in it, and they're all slightly different, and they're giving us these nice kind of different icy snowy chunks. All right, and all we need to do if we want to apply that same tag to our other emitter is we can just hold Control, drag it down, drop it onto our emitter, and now we have got those chunks in our scene. Simple as that. So let's just leave it the same for now, and now we can have a look at our small surface particles. So we'll just pause that, and actually let's just close that down, and we'll just switch off our large particles for now. Now our small surface particles, if we activate those and hit play, these are being emitted from the surface of our object, and they're flying up. Now I know just from experience and just by looking at this that we have nowhere near enough particles here. We have, if we go to the surface small emission tab, we have, let's have a look, 100,000 particles, nowhere near enough. Let's put this up to maybe 400,000. All right, and hit play. And this will start animating through. And once we've got them to a frame where we're able to kind of fill out this part of the viewport, we can then have a go at rendering these. So those are our small surface particles. And again, we can copy the settings that we have already set up for our static particles here, and they are in our painted system. Look, we have emitter, small surface, and we've got the same instance tag set up. So all we need to do is, look, let's hold control on that tag, drag it down to our emitter small surface emitter, and now if we go back to our real-time preview, hit render, and it's just going to sort that out. So then we've got all of our small chunk particles here in the scene, and already just like that it looks pretty cool. So that's looking nice. Then let's switch on our large particles, and then we've got the big chunks and those little chunks in the scene. Now there's one thing that I'd like to look at here, and it's got a bearing on how these particles are emitted. So let's just switch off that preview again, and we'll switch off the large. Now what we need to do is view the snow shell geometry that is being used to emit these particles. So let's come down to our scene geo, and inside our scene geo we have got the bool and the snow shell. So let's just activate that bool, make it visible, and now we can see our snow shell. Let's hit ND to see the lines. There's our snow shell. Now, this snow shell to me is looking like it has too much depth. It's too thick, and we want to make an adjustment. We want this to be a little bit thinner, and the way in which we'll do that is we have polygon geometry here, but what we can do is use a deformer to quickly adjust the thickness of this. So let's do that. So with the snow shell geometry, remember this is in the bool, the snow shell is the geometry, and it's being cut away by our spheres, and the bool is sorting out that operation. But if we get our snow shell, and if we go to our deformers menu and bring in a displacer, we have a displacer at the top of our scene here. Let's just close down these systems. So if we put this displacer as a child of our snow shell, nothing happens by default. But if we go to the shading tab of that, and if we put in a color, so you can see, look, our snow shell has actually doubled in depth. Why has that happened? Well, because this shader is pure white, it means that every vertex of our snow shell has been moved outwards by 10 centimeters. If we put this down to 0, it'll be like nothing has happened at all. If we go into negative height, look, it's getting thinner, and we can make it, if we wanted to, make it a really thin shell. But that's not what we want. Let's make it maybe minus 1.5. Now this is going to do a couple of things. It's going to mean that our particles get emitted on the surface of this closer together. It also means our volume particles are going to be packed a bit more tightly together, because the volume's thinner, but it's the same amount of particles that we're emitting. And it's also going to give us a bit more of a shadow along here, which is going to work really well in the render. So now we have done that, let's just go back to the first frame. We'll re-simulate those particles, and just while we're simming, it's a good idea to just switch off the bool, because then it's not having to calculate the bool and the particles. We're seeing our distorted spheres passing through the camera as it's simulating, but as soon as we switch the bool back on, they'll become invisible again automatically. Let's just get through to maybe frame 90, and then we'll be able to do a test render, and we're going to see the difference that just making that a little bit thinner has made. So there, we'll switch the bool back on. Let's go to our INSYDIUM cycles, real-time preview, and we'll just get that rendering. There we go. So now that we have got that done, we've got a bit more of a shadow under here, and later on in the scene, when this cuts back more, that shadow is really going to benefit us. Okay, so let's have a look at our system snow particles. We're just looking at the small surface particles. So now that we've sorted those, let's just press pause. let's get these cached now, so then we can start making further adjustments. And once we cache those particles, obviously we can play in the viewport much better. It will render much more quickly, and it makes it easier to move around. So before we do, let's just get our small volume. Go to our emission tab, and how many did we set here? 100,000. Let's change this to 300,000, so a lot more. All right. And now that we've done that, we obviously need to put an instance tag on here as well. So let's just copy that same instance tag. And what we'll do is we'll shut this down. Let's activate all of those emitters, and we're going to bring in a cache object to cache this scene now. So let's go to our utilities folder, and we'll choose a utility. The utility you want to choose is a cache. There's the cache. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to cache these to external files. So every frame is going to write a cache file for all of that particle data. By default, I'm just going to leave it in my documents folder, but you can put it wherever you wish. It's a good idea, obviously, to keep it in your project folder hierarchy. And that's going to work for now. So we'll just go back to the first frame. And actually, while we're building the cache, again, it'll be quicker if we deactivate the bool. We need to make sure the spheres are activated because they are being used in the emitter questions, but we can deactivate the bool, means it'll cache quicker, and that's pretty good. Let's give ourselves some room, so we'll build cache. So we'll leave this going. It's going to take about 2 or 3 minutes, so I'll pause the video here, come back to you when it's finished, and we can have a look, and I'll tell you how long it took. Okay, so that cache is finished. It took 2 minutes and 58 seconds, which is pretty good. And I've actually realized that I made one slight mistake in there. In our cache object, I forgot to click only in same system. And as a result, it has cached the emitters that we wanted to cache, but it has also cached these emitters in our painted system. We didn't need to cache these because we'd already done it. And now we have these 2 new cache tags which are not needed. So let's just delete those, leaving the original ones behind. And let's just go back down to our snow particles system. And just remember that in our cache object, we click only in same system. Let's just put it on now so we don't make any further mistakes, and it means it'll only cache emitters inside that same system. Okay, so now we've done that, let's just activate our bool once again so we can see what's happening here. And now that we have done that, we can just jump to whatever frame we want in the viewport. We don't have to play through this simulation, and all those particles are cached. All right, so let's get to a frame now where we've got quite a lot of particles in the scene, and we can go to our INSYDIUM. Let's go to our cycles real-time preview, and we'll get that going. And then in our object manager, what we want to do is see if we need to adjust any of these particles. Now, arguably, our 2 small lots of particles are all a little, possibly a little bit too big. Let's just move forward a frame, let that update. So we're getting this nice shadowing under here now, which I like. Let's just go to our 2 instance tags, and let's just reduce that scale down to 3%. Because we've got an awful lot of particles in the scene. So yeah, look, that's thinned that out a little bit now. That's looking better, and we can see these really nice large chunks. Now, I'm still not crazy about our camera angle here. Let's just move forward another frame. So frame 140 is getting close to the end of our animation. The animation of our bool stops at frame 150. Look, and this is where most of our particles have left us. So this is looking excellent. I think now that we adjusted our wind, I think arguably we're losing our particles a little bit too quickly. So we may want to just make some more adjustments to that wind. Let's switch off our real-time preview. So we can calculate this quickly. We'll make the bool invisible, switch off the bool operations so it's not having to calculate that, and let's play through these particles. Now we've got almost 750,000 particles in the scene here, so obviously we're not going to get real-time playback, but we're getting some pretty good feedback here. Now these particles, now that we have made those adjustments to the wind to sort out those kind of erroneous particles, they're moving out of frame arguably a little bit too quickly now. And yeah, so let's go back to our wind mod, and this is our first one that we altered, and I'm just going to reduce this back down, because remember we deleted that problem particle that was blowing with the turbulence too much, so that's no longer a problem. So I'm going to put this down to say 22, so they lose their speed a bit more quickly, and then I'm going to go to our accelerator, and then I'm going to bump this back up to maybe 29, and I'm hoping that they'll just slow down a little bit more, and then it'll take longer for them to then accelerate back out again. So we've made some changes, so we obviously have to recache, but you'll find that you'll do this in these types of scenes. You'll need to kind of simulate cache. You may even simulate cache, do some test renders, look at the render and not be happy with it, go back, recache, make adjustments. This is just part of the process. So we'll go to our cache object. We do have only same system check now, so it's not going to make new caches for the other system, the static particles. So we can just hit build cache, and we can overwrite, and we'll let that go through, and I'll pause again and come back to you when it's finished, and we'll have a look at the result. Okay, there we go, and that took 2 minutes and 47 seconds to recache that, and now we have our slightly different sim. So we can play that through, and we can kind of scrub through, and now we've got them, and yeah, and they're not kind of flying out of that frame quite as quickly as they were before. All right, so that's looking good. So let's just go back to our real-time preview. So I think the camera position, I mean, we're going to animate this camera position anyway, so it's going to need adjusting, but this is starting to look really cool now. You can see that the effect works fantastically well. And this translucent material that we put on, remember this translucent material is one node, one setting, and just look how fantastic it looks in our scene. It really is a stunning look. Right, so those are our particles that have been rendered. Obviously, we're not looking at the bool at the moment, so let's have a look at the bool in there as well. We'll activate that. Now I'm getting this nice shadowing under here. So let's just have a look at this camera position, and we'll come up here. Let's go to our camera, and we want to look at something like, we kind of want to be able to kind of get underneath here. So that's looking, to my eye, that is looking more like it. Yep, that's looking very good. Okay, so what we'll do, again, we'll just, so we don't, are not in danger of getting rid of that, let's go to a rigging tag, just put a protection on for now, and we can make further adjustments to that. So there's a few things that we still need to do. We need to animate that camera, but now that we've got our snow in, our lollipop, the colours are looking, well, a little bit anemic, shall we say. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work on that, and we're going to have to make some adjustments to our lighting setup as well, because our lighting isn't quite looking spot on yet. So still got some adjustments to make. So for now, let's just shut down our real-time preview again. And again, at this stage, I would urge you to do a series of test renders and make adjustments to your simulation. You're not going to get the perfect look the first go. It just doesn't happen with these things. The more experience you get, the fewer attempts it takes, but it's always a good idea to do a test render, see something animating in real time. Once it's rendered, will help you make adjustments to the simulation. We're going to kind of bypass most of those test renders and just move on and get everything finished, but we will knock out a quick draft render at the end before we have a look at our final render settings. So let's get our light lighting sorted out. Now, before we adjust our scene lights, our softboxes and our materials to make our lollipop look more vibrant, this red in ours is looking a bit anemic, what we'll do is we'll introduce our particles that are going to be these Christmas lights, because obviously these are contributing to the lighting of the scene as well. So let's get them in before we start adjusting the overall lighting. So to do that, if we have a look in our viewport, let's just close up our system painted. And let's switch off our emitters for now, all the cached ones. We can just minimize the utilities, modifiers and question folder to give ourselves a bit of room. And we are going to look at our emitter lights volume that we had previously set up. So let's switch that on, go back to the first frame, hit play, and here are our lights which are being emitted from the volume. These are being affected by the same particle question, so they're moving up with the wind. Now what we don't want is we don't want too many of these in the foreground of our scene, because they're going to be a little bit overpowering. Let's get these rendering so we can actually see what that looks like. So we'll go to INSYDIUM, Cycles and Real-Time Preview. Let's get that rendering. So obviously we can't see these lights because the emitter doesn't have a material, or it doesn't have an instance tag on it instancing an object. So let's get that sorted. So we want these to be lights, so we're going to create an emission material. So let's go to our material manager and we'll go to our arrow here, Cycles 4D, Surface, and we want an emission. It's going to emit light. So we'll click on that. Now if we just put this in its default state on our emitter lights, you're going to see those lights rendering. So there you can see the kind of effect that we're going for. Let's have a look at our emission settings. We'll double click here to bring up our node editor. Here it is. Just make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so here is our emission, and we've got our output node going into the surface of our particles, and here is our emission. So we want to change the color. Let's give this, we'll just open it up and we'll give it like an orange color, something like that. Okay, and then obviously these aren't shining brightly enough, so let's put the strength up. We'll try 20 to start with. All right, that's looking good. That orange obviously is too orange, isn't it? Let's bring that down. Something like that's looking pretty good. All right, so we can leave our emission material. Now, all of our particles are the same radius, so these are all perfectly the same in our scene. But what we can do is make adjustments to those using one of our brilliant instance tags. So let's go to our emitter, highlight it. We'll go to Tags, Extensions, INSYDIUM, Cycles, Instance Tag. And now, with our instance tag, if we don't put anything in our objects reference window here, it just instances spheres. And what we can do is we can reduce the segment count. There's no point in instancing so much geometry in these small spheres, and it doesn't matter if they look a bit irregular. So let's put this down to say 11. So now you can look, the kind of all the shapes are a little bit wonky because they don't have much geometry to these spheres, but that's cool. That helps us with our look. And then we can add some size variation. So put this down to maybe 30% size variation. Let's reduce the overall size because they're a bit big. Okay, excellent. So then if we go back to the beginning and if we just hit play, you can see we've got our instance spheres. There we go. Let's just switch off this to get to a frame more quickly, because obviously it's trying to render every frame there. So we'll get somewhere like maybe frame 80, play. So there we have our illuminated spheres, and they're looking pretty good. Let's activate our large volume particles. Let's activate our small volume. Let's activate our small surface, and then slowly but surely we're starting to get this overall look on the scene. Now this is starting to look really good. Now what we don't want is we don't want our lights to be overpowering this. I think our lights are still too big. Let's go to our emitter lights volume instance tag and switch that multiplier down to 40%. Make them a bit smaller. Yeah, and I think we could get away with having more of these light particles. So let's go to our emitter lights volume, the emission tab. We're only emitting 35. Let's double that to 70. Switch that renderer off. Let's just resim that. Now we've got loads more in our scene. Let's come forward to, let's play this through till we get maybe to frame 50 or 60, something like that. So we've got loads more lights in the scene now. Hit pause, hit play. We'll get those rendering. And now we should have loads more lights. Yeah, let's move forward. Now, one issue that we have here is that we've got some of these lights are in the same position as our large chunks, and as a result they're illuminating this translucent material from the inside, and that isn't quite the effect that we want. We can definitely see it here. There is a particle which it has exactly the same position as this chunk, and that is happened because our lights, if we go to the object tab, are being emitted from the volume. So it's using the same calculation to work out where that particle is going to be emitted from within the volume. And that's not really going to work for us. We want to make sure that these are separate. So what we're going to do, we're going to change this emission mode for these lights. We're going to change it from volume to polygon area, which is effectively the surface of that snow shell. So let's do that. And then if we go back to the first frame and go forward a frame, now we're going to have these lights appearing on this surface. There we go. Now, if we want them to be buried slightly more, what we could do is offset the origin. Let's just switch off these cached particles so this all happens a bit more quickly. We can offset the origin. Look, if we put -1, it's just going to bury those particles into that surface a little bit more. Yeah, look, so now they're kind of buried inside. All right, so that's looking good. So let's just hit pause on our preview. We'll just move forward. We'll simulate these particles forward a few frames. And now these will not have the same positions as those other volume particles. Let's hit play. So here are our light particles. And let's just activate all our other particles. This will take a minute because it's got to calculate all those hundreds of thousands of bits of geometry it's creating. So now we've got something that's looking pretty cool. Now, one thing to avoid, we've got one chunk that's still being illuminated by one of our particles here. And what we want to do is we want to avoid having too many of these light particles just in this chunk here. We want to kind of keep that bit free of light particles. So the way we're going to do that is, let's just close down this real-time preview and switch off these other particles. The way we're able to do that is, if we just come out of this camera, we want to prevent light particles just being in this first bit so they don't kind of get in the way of our large chunks. And we can do that by going to our emitter lights volume. And now we have changed this to polygon area. We can go to the fall off tab and we can pick, at the moment the shape's set to infinite, so the particles can be generated anywhere. But if we put sphere, now they can only be born on the surface of our geometry, but within this sphere. So if we just hit play in its default position, you can see, look, they've only been born there within the sphere. So let's move this sphere so that it means that we don't get particles around this kind of leading edge where our animation begins. So let's just hit play there, see what we get. We could just, so we can see this happening more clearly, let's just make our bool invisible. So look, there are our particles. Very good. I think we could maybe bring that down. So that's much better. So now let's go back into our scene camera. Now we've got rid of all of these particles that are here in the foreground. Now we may have been, look, a little bit too aggressive there. Let's pull this out a bit because we do want some near the edge. We just don't want lots here. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. Let's make this sphere a bit bigger still. Play again. Okay, go back to our camera. So now we've got some lights here. I think we've got too many lights. So let's go to our emission tab of our lights emitter and put this down now. Now we were missing in a smaller surface area, you see, so we can get away with fewer. Let's put that down to say 40. We don't want too many lights. Again, I think that might be slightly too much. Let's try 30. All right, that's looking pretty good. So we can get an idea of what this looks like without having to see them. Let's just get these lights cached now. So let's go back to the first frame with our other ones disabled, so it's not going to try and recache these. We can go to our utilities, cache object, and with all the same settings, we can just build cache. So let's do that. This should cache really quickly because there's only 30 particles. We could have switched the bool off to get this to calculate a bit more quickly, but look, it's going through it so pretty quick, so we're fine. So we'll just stay with this, and then we'll have those cached particles. There we go. Let's just close down our material manager, and now we can scrub through, and there we have our animated light particles. So let's come through to maybe frame 90. We'll activate all of our other particles. Let's make our bool visible again. Just close that down. And we'll go to INSYDIUM cycles. Let's bring in our real-time preview. And we'll give this a render. So it's just going to build the scene. And there, so now we've got our light particles and they're looking pretty good. Now that we have done that, I think we could go back to that instance tag and make them slightly bigger. Let's put that up to 60. Very nice. And now we've got these cached, we can just kind of jump to whatever frame we want in our timeline, and it'll jump there and it'll kind of recalculate, and we can have a look at these working in our scene. All right, so those lights are looking pretty good. Now what we need to do is go about addressing and getting the camera sorted, and also addressing some of the textures and some of the lighting to make it look a bit more appealing. And that's what we'll explore in our next video.